There are hundreds of millions of people on exchanges, and there are tens of millions of people who are doing self-custody insecurely with software only. I think all of our goals should be, growing the number of people that are in secure self-custody. The reality is our phones and computers were built to share information. They were not meant to protect value. Sometimes, even on the team, we talk about like, who is the Ledger user? And my response is like, who is the Google user, right? Someone who uses the internet.
Quick reminder, nothing said on Supply Shock is a recommendation to buy or sell any investment or product. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions, not financial advice or necessarily the views of Blockworks. Our hosts, guests, and the Blockworks team may hold positions the company's funds or projects discussed. Hey everybody, Pete Rizzo, the Bitcoin historian on X here with another great episode of the Supply Shock podcast. We've got the Chief Experience Officer at crypto wallet maker Ledger, Ian Rodgers, coming here to talk a little bit about what the world's largest hardware wallet maker is doing to keep our Bitcoin safe. Of course, as Bitcoin is climbing up into the right on the charts, it's reassuring. I always get reassurance from talking to people who are out there all day thinking of how to make this more safe, more secure. A Ledger user myself in my hardware custody setup. So excited to hear what the latest is. Ian, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you today? It is a good day for Bitcoin, isn't it?
The network's still running. We've always, you got to
every day is a good day.
The decentralized process of blocks goes on. But so Ian, excited if you would just jump in and dive into, I know that you're getting increasingly active as a company into these product showcases, that you're really kind of putting the product first out there, and would love to hear a little bit about if you could just recap the big news.
Sure. Yeah. So last week in Paris, we announced the Ledger Nano Gen 5 and also some new things inside of Ledger Wallet, which is what we're now calling what was, the artist formerly known as Ledger Live. But let's start with the new Nano. I did this on stage last week, but really we've, it's funny. I'll tell you the personal story. When I joined the company almost 5 years ago, I told my friend Tony Fadell, who was the founder of the creator of the iPod and the co-founder of the iPhone, that I was going to join Ledger with our friend Pascal to run the consumer business for Ledger. Because remember, Ledger has both an enterprise business and a consumer business. And Tony's response was, Ian, that business is not B2C, it's B2G, business to geek. And you have some road ahead of you before it's, truly a B2C business. And specifically on the devices, it's true that, asking a newbie, for those of us who have been in crypto for a long time, the Ledger Nano is, it's iconic. It's, I joke that it's like the Air Jordan Jumpman of crypto, right? Because if you're going to make, a piece of art that includes, a physical representation of, digital value, you're probably going to include the little, Nano with the swivel. At the same time, as iconic as the device is, pushing OK with two thumbs, I've onboarded enough people to know that they're like, okay, what do I do now? And they're looking at this teeny screen and they're kind of, going sideways with the right button, and then they've got to click OK with the two thumbs. And that's really what Tony was referring to, of course. So with Tony, we really put the same Ledger architecture, but behind an e-ink touchscreen. So e-ink, because you've got a low number of colors, so it's something that a secure element can actually drive. Because the key for us is to actually have a secure screen so that you can sign the transaction on the secure screen. So that means not only generating and storing the private key inside the secure element, and also doing the cryptographic operation inside the secure element. And some hardware wallets don't do that, any of those things. They've got sort of a secondary chip. Maybe they have secure memory, but they're using a general purpose MCU, the same chip that's in your remote control of your television or your toaster to actually do the cryptographic operations. We do everything inside of that secure element, but that secure element also powers the screen. And we at the beginning weren't 100% sure if you could drive a touch screen, from one of these type of chips. It's not what they were meant for. But we proved it was possible with stacks. Stacks was our first secure touchscreen device with this really innovative touchscreen that I won't get into. We've talked about it a lot in the past. We then did Ledger Flex, which the block just today they rated it as the number one hardware wallet available, and it is. The thing is, it's a tank. It's got a beautiful 16 shades of gray touchscreen and a metal frame, but that comes in at $249. And what we really wanted to do was get this down into the Nano X price point. And so that's why we spent all this time and energy working on the Nano Gen 5, is because we wanted to bring the superior usability of these touchscreen devices down into the same price point for the Nano X. And that's what this is. So this is the Gen 5. Apologies that for the background reading it, but so it's a beautiful device, custom screen, and just it's a real workhorse at a great price. So that's what we announced last week, along with with the new features from Ledger Wallet, including going super easy bank account to stablecoin, paycheck to stablecoin, to make on ramp way easier than it's been in the past. Also, some more browser connectivity we announced, and then we announced Multisig as well as part of everything we did last week.
Well, I was going to say, I've had the unique experience of actually onboarding both my parents at various points to a Ledger device. They have gone through that classic kind of clicking experience that you mentioned. It's been fits and starts, right? It's a couple hour process each time. Usually there's a lot of hand holding. And then even then, there's a continuation in, maybe me being involved in the management of these devices for my phone more than I'd like. I'm just curious, as you think through the device and what you're doing, do you think this is finally kind of the UX that cracks it for those older generations? Because they're, it seems like the people who are onboarding to Bitcoin now probably in the highest volumes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely, it definitely can be. It depends on the individual, of course, but I think the three things that you want to look at when you're, selecting a hardware wallet. I mean, first of all, let's just zoom out. I mean, we got to remember that, there are relatively few people in secure self-custody. And I think, like, for all of us, I mean, I'm glad, you're doing what you did with your parents, right? Because getting people into secure self-custody should be our goal. And I feel like a lot of time when we're having these conversations, we're kind of talking to ourselves. We're forgetting that there are hundreds of millions of people on exchanges, and there are tens of millions of people who are doing self-custody insecurely with software only. And then, we kind of end up like fighting over details with the sort of maybe 10 million people that are actually doing secure self-custody with hardware. At Ledger, we've sold, 8 million devices to somewhere on the order of 5 million people, right? Many people I meet say, "Oh, I've got 4 ledgers," and so, we think it's, 1.2, kind of per customer at the moment. And so really, like, I think all of our goals should be, growing the number of people that are in secure self-custody. And so we look at it in 3 buckets. One is security, the first one. And really, like I said before, if your bar, which it should be, is, generating a private key and storing that private key inside of a secure element, doing the cryptographic operations inside of that secure element, and then powering the screen with that same secure element, Ledger is the only choice. We're the only ones that actually take the architecture and the security architecture all the way there. Secondly, recovery, and, writing down 24 words on paper, okay, well, then you could do steal. But this is why we did Ledger Recover, because we know that the vast majority of people who hold crypto, hold a relatively small amount. So with a product like Ledger Recover, which has kind of $50,000 of recovery, if in the instance that it recovers your seed to the wrong place, there's a malfunction, and it does that covers 99% of all crypto holders and gives them a really simple backup solution. And then we added to that this year this recovery key. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's a little, the little NFC based. It's an electronic pin protected backup. These devices have NFC, and you can just hold the card against the back, it's pin protected, and now you have, a really simple recovery. You can't write the word down wrong. And if you have multiples of those in multiple locations, it really gives you a lot of peace of mind on the recovery front. Then the third thing is ease of use. And ease of use is like, how easy is it to set up? And also, how easy is it to back up and recover? But also, does it do everything you want it to do? Does it, can you connect to all of the services? Can you, and really, remember that Ledger devices were originally for one thing, Bitcoin. They were basically to hold this long-term investment, Bitcoin. But today, they'll hold any investment, real-world assets, anything on chain, 10,000 different tokens. Also, it's a yield-bearing savings account. Also, we have a credit card where you can load any kind of value into it, Bitcoin or anything else, and tap and spend out in the real world at any place that accepts Visa or MasterCard. So really we've gone from being like this one thing, a long-term investment, to kind of put Bitcoin on and put in your closet and forget about it for 10 years, to really being something where you can, manage, investments, savings, cash, and also passwords. It supports 2FA, passkeys. You can protect, and you should actually protect your exchange account using your Ledger. You can, protect your Google account, your X account, your login.gov account, whatever it is, all using your Ledger. It's a, I think the usability is all the way there, to do all of those things. And I think we're in this place where so many people are managing value with these devices that were meant to share information. Now, the reality is our phones and computers were built to share information. They were not meant to protect value. Ledger is a solution that's built, ground up to protect value. And that value, is obviously Bitcoin, but it's also, your passwords and your pass keys, so that you can be secure and you don't have to worry about, your phone being compromised and losing value, whether that's Bitcoin or identity or anything else.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear how you think about the different customer segments, right? Obviously myself, as I said, have a multi-sig setup with a few different key arrangements. For me, peace of mind is my Ledger's in a vault somewhere. I'm opening it up a couple times a year to make sure it still works. And I'm not plugging it in on a daily basis. But obviously, I think, as you said, we do have the power users and the folks who now are sort of in the on-chain economy who want, that accessibility, all those kind of rich features. How do you think about these two products? Can they be united by the same product?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's just like with our computers and our phones, right? We have lots of different kinds of users, and sometimes even on the team, we talk about like, who is the Ledger user? And my response is like, who is the Google user, right? Someone who uses the internet. Right. And I think the Ledger user is someone who has digital value, which will become all of us, over the next 10 years. So I think then, practically speaking, you definitely have, people who were early in crypto, and those are a lot of Ledger users, no question. Like we're certainly well known, with that group of people. Second would be people that are traders, right? So they are people who are, using crypto every day. And, they're doing something, and they, and they probably have a pretty heterogeneous setup. They've got like some deep storage. They've got some warm storage. They've got, some burner wallets, you know what I mean? Like these are people that are like, super savvy. And then I think, another class that's really growing for us is, just people that are like, sort of young people who are not they haven't had the experience of going into a bank and sitting down and filling out a form to set up a bank account. You know what I mean? Like the reality at this point is that managing your value is an app. It's not a bank account. And already, your Ledger or a lot of exchange accounts, or certainly neobanks, are doing way more for you than, my bank ever did when I was their age. And I think Ledger is really sort of like the premium version of any of those apps, because you've got security, you've got self-custody, and you have access not only to kind of what's in the walled garden of the custody account, which to me is sort of like an AOL account, but you've got access to really the open web and the entire world of decentralized finance. So I think, I always tell the story of going to, this is a few years ago now, going to the wedding of the son of a friend of mine. The friend's my age, and he's like, we don't know what Ian does. He's a nerd. He's always been a nerd, and whatever. He does something with technology. And the groom and the groomsmen were all like, dude, he works at Ledger. They are all in the cohort that knows Ledger, understands what it does. And I think that's the fastest growing segment of Ledger customers.
Well, I noticed you updated the nomenclature a little bit with this around, dropping the wallets and maybe going for signers. This has been kind of a grassroots discussion in the community about what relates most to kind of the newest cohort. Can you talk to us a little bit about that decision and kind of moving over to embracing the kind of signing nomenclature around how these devices operate?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, like when you were talking about onboarding your parents, like one of the hardest things about setting up a crypto wallet generally is just like, what is it? You know what I mean? And if you aren't a little freaked out at that stage where you're writing down your 24 words and you probably don't understand it yet, right? You know what I mean? And so, and even today, you can imagine that one of the first questions we always get is like, oh yeah, but what if you lose it? And now you've got to explain, you're really starting with the basics of how does it work? Because if it's a wallet, then my value's in it, right? That's how a wallet works, So I think, hardware wallet has always been a misnomer. And, it's just been sort of tolerated, I would say. But I think, we're kind of beyond it at this point, especially since the average consumer really thinks of their wallet as an app, right? And so, that's why we've, just wanted to be clear here and said, well, what are these devices and what do they do? Well, they're signers. This is what they do. And that is, simple, but really important. And so, really getting people to understand, this device is a secure signer. This is what it does. And then the other side of that is I do have an app on my phone and it's a wallet, and Ledger has, the best wallet out there that does more than most you're going to encounter. And we need to put that, front and center, especially since like so many people don't know that. I mean, there's so many people who use Ledger Wallet, used Ledger Live 5 years ago, and they don't know what it does today. And we've been just kind of like gradually, adding more and more, features to it. And we really want people to, try it today. And also for us, it's setting an intention of, what this is competitive with, right? And really, Ledger Wallet isn't just to update your firmware and to add apps. It actually does, what many other software wallets do and way more, but it does it securely with our signer devices. And we wanted to really put that, front and center and just be clear. I think, look, will people stop saying hardware wallet? Of course not. But I think for us, when we talk to people, we can say, look, you have a signer, you have the wallet app, and with that, you can really do anything that you want to do. And it just makes it simpler for us to communicate what it is we do and what our products were made for.
If you were to ask me, is a recession coming? The first question should be, is the market going down? This is why the forward guidance is way more important than the actual policy.
I'm Felix, host of the Forward Guidance podcast, and somebody who's wildly obsessed with all things macro and crypto and where the two worlds collide.
Once we looked at the world through this lens of the debasement of fiat currency, we realized there's actually only two assets that outperform this.
10-year yields went from 360 to 480 in 5 months while the Fed was raising rates. Sorry, Jay Powell, that was a rejection of the policy.
Whether it's Michael Howell breaking down global liquidity or Joseph Wang dissecting monetary policy, we talk to the best and brightest so you can always stay on top of the most important stories driving macro.
You add up tariffs and big, beautiful bill, the train is stopped. In fact, it's going in reverse.
A year ago was the first time in 25 years of doing this that every little single thing that I looked at told me to sell.
We cover everything from inflation to interest rates to bonds and Bitcoin and all the biggest forces shaping the global economy. Subscribe to Forward Guidance and stay one step ahead of the next big move.
Yeah, speaking of, obviously, I've been a long time user, right? I've kind of mentioned the complexity of my personal setups. I'm curious how you're thinking about the life cycle of these devices now that they've been out. They're securing so much value. They've been in the wild. Something that has really been kind of core for me over the last couple of years is really, going through estate processes, like thinking long term about these assets in a certain way. But at the same time, my ledgers are getting on in years, right? Maybe on year 4 or in year 5. Obviously, I know you have a lot of R&D. You're perfecting these products. You probably want me to be buying the latest version of these devices. How are you thinking about just the legacy product mix? How long do you expect a ledger to last these days, and what's the kind of going guidance from the firm?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually approach it really practically. To be honest, it's not really about like having a replacement strategy. It's just making sure that you're never at risk. The Ledger Nano is the only device that is now, no longer supported. The reason for that is that, as you probably know, it doesn't have very much memory, and it's got an older chip in it, right? So security being, at the forefront, and security is a moving target. You've got to look back and say, how much can we support the firmware, and for how long, and for what? Right, because supporting Bitcoin is sort of the base task, but we've supported so many tokens over time. How far down that list can you go, and how far back, right? So if you're using your Nano S, for Bitcoin only, works perfectly fine today. At the same time, you are using an older chip. I would recommend that you upgrade. Electronics don't last forever. And especially when you can get a Nano S Plus for $50, which has, exactly the same chip as the device that we launched last week. Well, if you have more than $50 that you're protecting there, then I'd recommend it. I just approach it really practically. Also, I mean, really, if you, every OPSEC, operational security is very personal. So I'm just giving, again, what I feel like is practical advice. And then I think people need to do what is right for them. But again, a Nano S Plus has exactly the same level of security as any of our devices. It literally has the same chip in it as, Gen 5 Stacks and Flex, and it's $50. So, I think good practice is, if you are buying a touchscreen device, buy a couple of Nano S Plus and set them up with exactly the same seed phrase. And now you just got a backup. You've got, if you put yours through the washing machine, or, something happens to it, you don't have to worry. You've got this S Plus sitting here as a really inexpensive backup. I feel similarly now that we have this Ledger recovery key, having multiple recovery keys, which are pin protected, in multiple physical locations. I just today, got a note from somebody who lost their Nano and their seed phrase in a fire. They were both in the same place. I got a couple of those calls after the Palisades fire in LA. It's just good practice to maybe have a second Nano S Plus set up with the same seed phrase, or a Ledger recovery key. If you're protecting real value, please don't have any single points of failure. No electronics last forever. That's just not possible. Right. And by the way, if you have your 24 words safely protected, then, there isn't any reason to worry, or, you don't even need a device. You got your 24 words safely protected, and you're not transacting. You don't even need a device. It's not an issue. Right. So again, I just approach it super practically. But also, from our perspective, like keeping every plugin up to date on every device. You can't support an operating system on any device forever. Go get your iPhone from 2016 and, tell me how great the latest, iOS runs on it. Right. I mean, that's not real life. But yeah, so, we're just constantly, really trying to update. Again, security is a moving target. You want to be using the latest chips, the latest operating system, the latest plugins. You just want security is not a static effect.
Yeah, I'm just curious what the going guidance is. I think I'm on, a bit farther in my journey than most people, right? I've managed a multi-sig setup for many years, and now getting into like third rotations, and as you mentioned, geographic locations, right? It adds up to kind of maintain this, complex, universe of your personal security. So I guess I am just curious how you're thinking. Obviously you said a little bit about that, but is the future, are you trying to get to it all is managed in one device? You mentioned multi-sig support being rolled out in this. Do you think the future is more multi-sig for applications like this? So how are you balancing that?
I really think the future is heterogeneous, right? I think you're going to have, something that you do carry with you all the time, which is sort of like a YubiKey, right? It's a ledger that you're using for passkeys, and maybe it's got a couple of bucks on it. Again, we already have a credit card, which is a debit card that pays Bitcoin rewards, and that's sort of like having a hot wallet, right? I can load any amount of value on it. Now I can just tap to pay. And then you're also it depends on the account and the assets. But yeah, I think for someone that uses, that's storing a significant amount of value, they probably will use multi-sig. We've always kind of had this gap between our basic retail product and Ledger Enterprise, because retail product is, perfect security for an individual, but it doesn't have governance, which you really need if you're an organization. And then we've had Enterprise, which is like truly enterprise. It's for banks and governments and custodians and people that are at that size. And we've really kind of the small business and DAOs and, these kind of people in the middle, we've really, we've never really had a solution for them. So Ledger Enterprise really is for, these, small to mid-size, enterprises. So I think the retail customer is completely fine with Ledger retail product. If you're an individual, then you're fine there. But if you're an organization, then you are going to have multi-sig or Ledger Enterprise, because you really need the governance. And then I think the nice thing is like it's a big sky and a big market, and we love products like Unchained Capital, and where you can do things in in different ways, and Ledger's compatible with all of the above.
Well, yeah, I got to ask for one down a little bit, but obviously holidays coming up. This is a perennial question that I'm always struggling with. You want to give Bitcoin for the holidays. It's, one of those things that 15 years on, probably not as solved as we'd like. I think my default right now is still, giving people preloaded, open dime wallets to folks that hoping that they at least won't lose it later. So how are you giving Bitcoin to people in your life? Do you do that? And if so, what's your hot tip for how to do it and where they won't lose it next year?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for asking. I mean, because people would love to kind of give them a ledger that's already set up, but of course you can't do that, because only the owner of the device should have the 24 word.
Of course, but then send the Bitcoin later. Right?
Well, let me actually just talk about Ledger and Bitcoin for 1 second, then land at the answer to your question. Of course, like Bitcoin is why we're here. All of us, personally and as a company, right? So first of all, we started doing. Well, I think I'm actually trying to get the number, and it's harder than you'd think to get, but the amount of Bitcoin that Ledger has given away is extraordinary, because we've been paying affiliates in Bitcoin since 2017, and then if you notice over the past few holidays, we don't do discounts. What we do is we give Bitcoin as the rebate instead of the discount, right? So it's kind of value plus instead of value minus, right? It's like, buy this device and you're going to get Bitcoin. So it's actually quite a good way when we do these promotions, because you get a Ledger device and you get a voucher for Bitcoin. So it's a pretty great present, because you can get them the device, and the voucher. And like we've given away a lot of Bitcoin with this mechanism over the years. The other thing on top of this is that we have these Bitcoin devices. So we have a Bitcoin edition Nano S Plus, and we also have a Bitcoin edition Ledger Flex. And when you buy those, we donate to Bitcoin Core Dev, specifically Brink, every time someone buys one. So every time you buy one of these devices, not only are they cool looking, they're Bitcoin orange, but we donate to Brink. And we just got some info from Brink on kind of what percentage of what they do is Ledger, and I was positively surprised that we're contributing that way. But it's hundreds of thousands of dollars per year that we're donating to Bitcoin Core Dev, and frankly, not enough people are donating to Bitcoin Core Dev for all of us to be happy when you consider how important it is to all of us. So I guess the answer to your question from my perspective would be buy them a Bitcoin edition Ledger device. The Ledger Flex is a good choice. Like I said, it was just number one hardware wallet in I think it was the block today. And it's a great device. There is a Bitcoin edition. It's cool looking. It's got a little orange piece of steel on the bottom, Bitcoin logo on the back. Not only will you have donate money to Bitcoin Core Dev, but if you do it during the time that there is a promo, which coming up for the holidays, you could imagine something like that. You have the opportunity to give that gift receiver, gift enjoyer, a little bit of Bitcoin as well. So that is what I do. And that's what I'd recommend as well. We're trying to come up with better ways to do that too, because we have great relationship with Best Buy as an example. We've never really had a way to make that Bitcoin promo work with Best Buy. So we've been trying to work on some improvements so we can get more to more.
Well, the gift that keeps on giving, right? But we have to keep giving it in order to.
No, yeah, exactly, and hopefully in secure self-custody.
Right. Ian, appreciate the time. Congrats on the big launch. Always excited to hear what's up at Ledger. As I mentioned, I am using Ledger as part of my own security setup. So it's heartening to know all the time and effort that's going into securing the products around the world and with all the customers you have. So I appreciate that.
Man, I think the only other thing I wanted to add for you and your audience, again, as a listener of your podcast, is just that Ledger cares a lot about Bitcoin. I mean, hopefully you can see that, but also first to support Taproot, first to support Multisig, many things on the Bitcoin front. And I think a story that it's funny because people get a lot of credit for having a Bitcoin treasury, but Ledger has and has for longer than anybody, long enough we don't talk about it. But we really, we're in the game. If you don't believe in Bitcoin, you can't be in this game, as far as I'm concerned. And so if you believe, then you got to go all the way.
Well, I'm waiting for your announcement now. You've got me my interest peaked about the Ledger Bitcoin treasury. But Ian, appreciate the time. Everybody can go and check out the latest editions of Ledger over on the Ledger website. As mentioned, I do recommend Ledger as part of my personal setup, one of the longest standing hardware wallet makers. Can't go wrong there. While you're there, go to blockworks.co. Of course, we've got a great suite of podcasts. If you want something less Bitcoin specific, I've got a who's who of other podcasts who list a forward guidance for your macro and traditional financial advice. Go down the stack. We've got podcasts related to Solana, Ethereum, and other all the latest and greatest out there in the crypto space. Once again, that's blockworks.co. For now, this has been the Supply Shock, a Blockworks podcast.